Welcome to Living Chassidus. Together, let's live the Chassidus we learn. Okay, welcome everybody. Here we are at Living Chassidus. Another SAI for bringing. Yes, we're good? Awesome. Okay, so now we are going through SAI of Counting the Omer, where everybody does daily reading from this incredible book by Rice and Jacobson, does once a week journaling, and gets prizes for doing so. So Mazel Tov, and so proud of every single person who's been working on themselves. Okay, I want to present everybody who earned their prize. I want to show you what the prize is. So first I will say a very beautiful and really inspirational. It's an absolute must in every home. In my family, we all read it, from me, my husband, all of my kids, we read it constantly. And it's an incredible book. So huge Mazel Tov. And for everybody who's here, you might have the schos of getting it autographed by the author. So this is Mazel Tov to Rachel Fenwick Smith, Ruta Cohen from Mahershkovik, Esther Citrin, Chana Simcha Hillel, Ariella Zuckerman, Yosefa Wood Eisenberg, Sarah Schrodelson, Adina Lapine. Special shout out to Adina, who had Mesiras Nefesh, and she's taking care of my children while I'm here. We love you, Adina. Sima Dashevsky, Chaya Matasov, Esther Malka Cohen. And if you did not yet send me your hand up about this program, please do so, and you will also receive a safer for yourself. Okay, with all of that said, we have the incredible schos of having one of my favorite authors. I have to be completely honest. A few years ago, I found the book Shadar, and from that point on, I was hooked. And every single time I see a new book, specifically the biographies, but also the life, I forgot what they're called, life series. And I am very honored to have found this gem in Crown Heights and stopped them and say, hey, can you please speak for us? So Rabbi Dovid Zaklikowski was born in Crown Heights, neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. He began his writing career at the age of 16 while studying at the Rabbinical College of America. Since then, he has written thousands of articles with a focus on Jewish history. His articles have appeared, among others, in Mishpacha magazine, Hamodia, Ami magazine, and the Jewish Standard. David lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Chana Rezel, and their 5 children, Mati, Meir, Shana, Benny, and Mendel. Today, David is a freelance journalist, and we are so lucky to have him. For everybody who's here, he even made for us a handout. If you're not here yet, please contact us about the handout. So thank you.
Hi everyone. I guess introduce me. So one of the challenges of writing a book is biographies, which I occupy most of my time, is the actual creating of a story. What does that mean, of a story? So most of us, when we think back, including myself, we have very little of our life which we recall. So 40 years old, I can name you maybe 50, 60 things that happen to me, but every single day we have different stories that happen to us, and interesting things, but most of it is forgotten. And I realized that there's a reason why they're forgotten, and I've been on sort of a crusade, especially when it comes to women, which I believe that we don't know enough about because they're busy telling stories about their husbands, fathers, and not about themselves or their mothers. So what happens is how a story is created, and that's sort of the topic of tonight. And it was gonna be of a story is the creation of a story is in our minds, and how we take things from our lives and think about them and then speak about them. So a lot of times when we get together, we're speaking about other people. We're speaking about that happened to that person, it's happened to that person, and a lot of sometimes things, not nice things that happen to people. But if we sort of think about our lives, the things that we go through, someone tells us something interesting, and we think about that, something happened to us, and we think about that this thing that happened, and we repeat it over to people, then we're sort of thinking, first of all, we get the other person, we're speaking about interesting things, and we get the other person to think about what happened to us and what they could learn from it. But a lot of times we think that, why should I speak on myself? It's like sort of like, the opposite of we're taught to be humble, to be not to be proud, not to have gaiva, not to all the kind of things that we hear in Chassidus. But I believe that when you talk about how great you are, no one's interested really in even hearing that. That's contrary to what do you call it? That doesn't make conversation. That makes, when you leave the conversation, that people are going to then speak about you. However, when we speak about stories that happen to us, interesting things, and I'll give you some examples that happened, recently that I speak to my kids. I try to, when they come home, tell them, oh, this happened to me, that happened to me. Let's say, for example, that an invitation arrived in my house. Sorry, I should say that someone, what do you call it? There was a wedding 2.5 months ago, someone I knew, and the invitation never arrived to my house, and I didn't want to go to the wedding. At the end, I went to the wedding like 11:30. I said, listen, I'll go anyways if I'm uninvited. Hopefully you forgot that you didn't invite me. So he lives here in Crown Heights, and I live in the same zip code. But 2 months later, the invitation arrived to my house, and I realized that he didn't, what he called, he didn't mean, he sent the invitation on, it's February 25th, it says on it, and it arrived to my house on May 5th. So it came 2.5 months later. And I said, thank God that first of all I went, and second of all, I realized that he never, what he called. So we sometimes judge people. I said, look, what happened, it's not their fault that it happened. It's the post office, whoever's fault that lost it, that it happened. But these are things that we could speak about. It's not like anything gaiva or anything about it. It's about us. I'll see, for example, I see my wife one day, she's baking cookies, and then she's baking, there was almond raisin, balls that she was making. I'm like she said, oh, like the kids in her playgroup were making, for the parents who had children, they're making them cookies, whatever. I said, why are you making balls? There's one family that the mother eats very healthy, so she was making them. So I was telling my kids that, look, this is what my wife did. It's not like anything. I just telling them, and then obviously today I remember it, even though this was 3 or 4 weeks ago. If we don't speak about the things that people tell us, ideas, not necessarily anything about it to make ourselves like we're great people, but just think about the things that are happening in our daily life, and that's the way ultimately the stories happen. So I'll speak about a story which I was working on a book, and I'm going to try to go through it in the documents, which involves the teaching how to create stories in general. That means that creating stories, if you're ever going to do family history, which everyone should most definitely do, creating family history is not so complicated. It involves several tools. Hopefully I'll be able to a little bit to go through what those tools are, but ultimately it involves documents and oral history coming together, and how that happens is, we'll get to it. So if you see, I knew my grandfather, page 2, I'm sorry. I knew my grandfather, Rabbi Chaim Meir Buket, was involved somewhat in printing of Sfarim in Shanghai, but I thought that it was very basic, like nothing. He was just involved, like on a, I don't know, he got some letters and some ideas, whatever it was. And I have a letter here that he wrote to the Rebbe, which was, this is 1946, it's the Ramash. That's physically his handwriting. Someone found the letter 1946. This is going back around 24 years ago. So I've kept this by me all those years of this letter. It's extremely cryptic, the Rebbe's answer, because it's not the Rebbe's answer to my grandfather. It's just notes. You see on top, this is my grandfather's handwriting over here. Over here, that is the Rebbe's comments on my grandfather's writing, which to me was like extremely cryptic, the answers. We're speaking about that how many copies he printed, and then the Rebbe's comments in it. And if you see, it says like one words. It says Shabbos, Shalah, right? I'm saying it in Hebrew because I'm not going to read it over here. On page 3, 4, you actually see I typed it up what the Rebbe's answers were. Talks, right? Talks and Tales, Runaway. That was one of the books that they had. Or then it says Mar Toeg, Ish Yerle Kim Askan. So Mr. Toeg, which is an activist. Now I'm like in my mind sitting here trying to figure out who Mr. Toeg is. I do a search online. I can't find really anything about the Toeg family when I do a search for Shanghai. Very little back at that point, and I forgot about this. Now I'm working on Kosher Investigator, which is a book about Rabbi Vera Levy, and sort of when I entered the book of writing the book, it was very I didn't know how interesting it would be. And that happens a lot of times when I'm writing books. I don't really have a basis of a story here. I'm trying to create stories. Yes, I know we work in kashrus, but like, how much could you write about it? It's very repetitive. And the point is they have interesting anecdotes. Everyone who we knew passed away. We're talking about someone who passed away in 1985. It's going back many, many years. So I'm going through and I find an article that he wrote. And if you look on page 13, in one of the articles, he writes that he lands in Manila, in the Philippines, and he had a deal with the Rebbe, or it worked out that wherever he goes, if there's no mikvah, he would pay for half of the mikvah, and the Rebbe would pay for the other half of the mikvah. So literally in the Philippines, the Rebbe sends him there, and Mr. Toeg, right over there. So while I'm working on this book, I realized right away, my gosh, Mr. Toeg is sitting in the Philippines, and I'm sitting in, and here is the same guy that the Rebbe is writing about to my grandfather, maybe to help him because they were wealthy people. I'm not 100% sure. It's fine. But now part of the way I'm saying I speak to people. I'm constantly telling people the things that happen. I'm telling people like, listen, I found Mr. Toeg, which my grandfather was what he called to, and everything that I'm going through. So I bounce off my ideas with a lot of people. Books are not created in a vacuum. I tell people, I'm telling people ideas like this will happen. I met that guy, I met this person. And then someone tells me that his grandfather had a yechidus with the Rebbe. So it's a private audience with the Rebbe. And there, the grandfather tells him, right? Okay, it's on page 11. I know it's in Yiddish, right? I'll read it. So he tells him that he tells Rabbi Yitzchak Dovid Groner was in Australia. So one of the things was that the Rebbe did was that there was no possibility to be shluchim back in the 50s and 60s in every single country. So anyone who was going to go travel, he was telling them to stop in a million countries. Like when Rabbi Groner traveled to Australia and back here, it was every 2 years, whatever it was. He stopped in like 7 or 8 countries. If it wasn't Japan, if it wasn't the Philippines, in all different kind of islands. So in addition to American shluchas, they also like stopping by. People are stopping these islands, and sort of the Rebbe kept these tabs on people. So if you look in what's going on over here, is that the Rebbe is already speaking about the mikvah in I think this is 1963, right? So he says like this. He says like, so he tells them that that in Manila, the first was there's a chaplain, right? Because the U.S. Army had a base over there for many years. It doesn't exist today, but for many, many years in the Philippines, the famous U.S. Army base. So first of all, there's a chaplain. The Rebbe tells him that he arranged for kosher there. And then there's also someone there that came from Shanghai. And Bukit Kenem, it means my grandfather Bukit, telling him, knew who he knows him. And he lives in he lives in over there in the Philippines. So you automatically, when I'm sitting and I'm thinking, so I feel connected to. So what I'm saying is that I'm thinking about things, I'm speaking about it, and this is a story that's already being created. I'm working on Rabbi Levi. I feel already connected in my own life, and I have already what to speak about. About what's happening with this book. This is not necessarily anything great or anything that I'm speaking highly about myself. I'm just saying things that are happening. This is conversations that happen because we just think and put things together and having conversations, not necessarily speaking about other people whatever, negative things about other people, but we're speaking about interesting ideas and interesting that are happening in our life. Now, we get to book printing. It gets very complicated. What does that mean? I'm sort of like want my books to be printed well, and that's the process of making sure the bindings are good, so it lasts a long time, that the printing should be good, etc. It's not perfectionist, but I want just to be good quality because I read myself books, and I want the same experience that I have from a book. It shouldn't be too heavy. It shouldn't be too it should just be easy. I could break open the binding. It's not going to fall apart into pieces. These are things that I want and I demand for myself. So I've gone through over the past 12 years, like 4 or 5 printers. And at that point, I was printing 2 books. So one's a coffee table book, which was Footprints, and one was Kosher Investigator that I'm printing. And I have friends who are photographers, and they told me that there's this printer in what do you call it, in China, which does great work for a decent price. So I'm then gonna, for the very first time, send 2 books to China, while in the past I've printed somewhere else. Okay, so sort of one more time, I feel like a connection here of China to my grandfather was in Shanghai during the war. He escaped through what do you call, from Atvatsk, Poland to Lithuania, to Soviet Union, all the way to Japan. Then he landed in China. So it's a long story, not for now. But the point was that my grandfather was there, and he had some kind of connection there with printing. So already like feeling in my mind, like, okay, my grandfather was involved in the printing, whatever it was, but I don't know to what extent or anything like that. Then one day I get a phone call from a shliach in Connecticut. He calls me up. He says, the conservative temple for 7-8 years, making me crazy in my town. It's a little tiny town in Connecticut. There's maybe like 700-800 Jews there, and they're making me crazy. So I'm like thinking in my mind, it's old Chabad books. So they're like, okay, like, what does mean old Chabad books? There's probably a bunch of talks and tales, and and our peoples. And he's like, I'm not interested in old our peoples. I have nothing to do with it. Whatever. It's like, yeah, I'll come get it, because I'm pushing off. It's 5 years. He's pushing it off, and then at one point they're like, okay, he gets a call. We're going to bring it over to you because we're fixing the office where the books are. He's like, okay, fine, listen, bring it over to me. I'll put it into Seamus and I'll move on with life. In any case, he calls me up and tells me that
you're making him crazy about that.
A box of books. Like he's like thinking like he's doing random Chabad books. Like what could it be? Like nothing. So so they bring these books to him. He opens it up and he's like, these are not books. These are like manuscripts, literally like handwritten. So I'm like, he's like looking at them, and then he sees that it says, see this? These are our handwritten things over. He says that it says, the guy is, you look on page 5, you can see a picture of him. His name is Chaim Leibush Probst, and he's writing over here that this book was in Temchei Tmimim in Vilna. She's like Poland, and he knows that I'm into Poland. Like someone tells him, listen, Zaklikowski for sure is gonna want the books. So I'm like, okay, bring me the books. Like, okay, fine. Like, we'll see what it is. I'm not like, he didn't like really explain. He said it's a bunch of books from one of the students that learned in Shanghai, and he was in Poland. So I said, okay, fine. So bring me the books. He brings the books. I'm going through this whole process of China and dealing with printing, and this guy Chaim Leibush Probst turns out to be one of the students that were there, and I get it, and I'm sitting here and going through the books. This is one of the books that the students printed in Shanghai. It's on page 7 in your pamphlets. I just don't know what it calls. I'll bring it up, but sort of like freaked me out and almost fell down to the floor. Okay, so this is the book that is printed. It says over here, it's originally Vilna. It says printed in through the students of the Temchei Tmimim, which is the Bam Shiva, in Shanghai. What does it say on the bottom? Right? Nitzvas Ayidei. He writes in his own handwriting. This is Probst writing his own handwriting. Nitzvas Ayidei, printed by the 2 students' names, Hatalmid Gershon Chanovitz, That's one of the students. Batamid Chaim Meir book it. So literally, my grandfather book that he printed by himself while I'm dealing finally with China, all of a sudden lands into my hands in Crown Heights. So it's just like a whole, what do you call it? It's like a whole, like my whole mind is like freaking out. Like this is sort of the way I'm thinking, and I feel like so connected right now. Like, okay, I'm finally printing in China, and here I actually know that my grandfather actually printed svarim, like physical svarim, and like the guy wrote it down and thing, and this all of a sudden lands in my house in the, what do you call it, in Shanghai. Now, I just want to just stop on two things. Very interesting, that books of Chassidus, very few were printed before they came to the United States. You could count them almost on your hand. I'm talking about of Chabad, and the students literally copied of chapters of Tanya, Maimon, and just literally just wrote them down in their handwritings, and piece by piece. And this you're talking about like little, like I would say, like I don't know, like you ever got an assignment to write 1,000 times from a teacher? This is not like assignment of your teacher. You're dealing with, you know what I mean, hundreds pages, and I have like 7 of these books of just literally handwritten of Chassidus and different handwritings, and he writes in each one when he wrote it down and when he got a letter and when he got something, you know what I mean? So it's like literally Hataka Mimeni. This is he's writing. I wrote this down by myself from a letter from Chakatash from the Rebbe Ayatz, Fidik Rebbe, on 8th of Tammuz, Tafir Sadak Test, 1939 in Atvatsk. He's writing down when he wrote it down. This is literally they carried with them. Now this is meaningful to me because I'm thinking to myself, like, my grandfather told me that when they went through Russia, right, they were deathly scared. What were they scared of? Well, what do you think, like when they're here in 1941, they're in Vilna in Lithuania, what are they scared of more, the Germans or the Russians? Like at that point, we all would think that they would be scared of the Germans, right? We think, but they were more scared of.
For anyone who doesn't understand what happened with the students in that bus and what.
Sure.
Yeah. So
it's a very long story, and I don't really want to get into it. I'm just saying that basically the Fidik Rebbe, the Rebbe Yatz, at one point tells the students that they should all go. They're all in Poland. They should all go to Lithuania. Lithuania at that point is just had become a sovereign state. That means that the Polish captured it, and then the Russians during the war, the Soviet Union and Germany split Poland, and that went to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union gave Vilna back to the Lithuanians. So they all told them. So the Fidik Rebbe told them to go run to Lithuania. Now they have to get to Lithuania. They want to get to the United States, where the Fidik Rebbe went to the United States. And this is a long and complicated, how are they going to get to the United States? One of the stops they have to go through was through the Soviet Union. And if you think about it, the Germans, the Lubavitchers especially, but even all the rest of the religious Jews are more scared of the Soviets, of the communists, than of the Germans. The Germans during World War I weren't cruel necessarily to people. They thought there's a war in Poland. There's bombs falling, right? No one wants to live in a place where there's a war, so they're running away. We're not dealing with bombs, right? You're not dealing with the Holocaust that we know from that happened 3 years later, gas chambers 2-3 years later when they started. No one's thinking about that. Thinking about the Soviets who literally murdered hundreds of Lubavitchers, sent many more to Gulag, almost killed, the Rebbe, the Fidik Rebbe. And they're like, we're going to go through now, going to head through the Soviet Union. So like, it's like mind-boggling. Like, what are they going to do? So there's like, they have to keep everything a secret. So like, if you look in on page 10, right? If you look on the second column on the right, it says, so the Rashag, which is Rabbi Garari, who's the head of the Lubavitch Yeshiva and the Fidik Rebbe's son-in-law, he's writing to an American official, kindly note we must be very careful when going to get the Russian visas. And nothing should be said that these students have any connection to Rabbi Schneerson or Chabad. this information is not advisable for Russia and would bring much harm to these students. They were literally scared to death, right? So now they're going through Russia, and if you look on I'm fascinated, but this is the way stories are created. I'm trying to explain the way stories are created. If you look on page 9, right? Page 8 and 9. Let's start with page 9. What's wrong with this letter? What does this bother anyone when you see this letter on page 9? Well, besides that, I mean that's normal because they ran it from place to place. It's missing the letterhead, right? It's literally chopped off. Why is it chopped off? If you look on page 8, okay, you see something scratched out, right? On the top line on page 8, scratched out. Lubavitch. He literally scratched out the word Lubavitch. They're scared to death that any official stopped them. They're going to look inside their things. They're chopping off letterheads. They're scraping out Lubavitch, literally like out of, you know what I mean? Like off of the booklets. So like they cut off pages. He cut off the what do you call it? The physical page of the book that says on Lubavitch. And that's what this is what they were doing. So they were literally scared to death of what do you call it, of what was happening. Now, so what was interesting was that my grandfather, once they're in Russia, in the Soviet Union, so then there's a bunch of Lubavitchers there who hadn't seen the Frierdiker Rebbe he already left in 1927. So they haven't seen him, and they're sitting there, and it's already like 14 years, and they probably don't have anything to learn from, and they haven't gotten anything new. And here we're sitting with all the Frierdiker Rebbe's, because they're writing it down with their hand, and they literally took many of them. It means they kept some, right? He kept some of his, but my grandfather didn't come with so many out. We don't have that many, and many other people. They just literally left it inside the shul, in the Lubavitch shul in Russia. They left printed books, but you don't think about it like, because when you think about it, they left printed books, it's one thing. But when you're leaving your handwritten books, which you wrote by your hand, it's 10 times more Mesiras Nefesh that you have for it is 10 times greater than just the what it calls. So it adds these things when you're just thinking about, when you have a document in your hand, when I'm going through documents, when you're thinking about what's going on, what's happening, where are things coming from. And that's sort of the way stories are created. So what happens is they get to Shanghai, right? And there, my grandfather prints books, and you have that. So now I sort of have an entire picture of, first of all, of what's happening. So there's fascinating details of what we learn from 3 different documents about them. First of all, chopping off from Chabad. They don't want anyone to know about Chabad. So you have this whole interesting thing that they were scared more of the Soviets than of the Germans, and then ultimately coming to Shanghai, and then they leave Shanghai and come to the United States, and they build an entire, they were the first teachers in the Lubavitch Yeshiva over here in America, when it came to all the students that went through Shanghai and came there, and they started the yeshiva in Montreal, and then those students, part of the students in Montreal, went across the entire America to open yeshivas or day schools here, and that is the story of creating a story.